And so once you've chosen, your target, that's when you're going to rate your level of distress. And then, as we went over the points before, you start with your karate chop point. That's kind of how you're waking up your nervous system. And when we start on the karate chop point, this is where we say what is commonly referred to as the setup phrase. And this is really your target. It's your tapping target, what you're choosing to focus on. And the setup phrase has two parts. The first part is the negative part. You want to actually express, acknowledge what is bothering you. The negative part of the setup statement usually starts with even though dot dot dot. So even though such and such is happening in my life, even though I'm feeling this pain in my head, even though I'm feeling this pain in my back, even though I had this really bad encounter with a colleague at work, even though I'm not over my breakup and it's really making me miserable, whatever the thing is, you have to give it a voice. You have to acknowledge it and really look at it and focus your mental energy on it if you want to clear it. Ignoring it is never going to make it go away. It's just going to bury it deeper and deeper and deeper and cause all sorts of problems for you. On that note, there's so many resources out there on tapping, but one of my favorite resources is the tappingsolution.com. That website is hosted by a brother-sister team, Nick and Jessica Ortner. They're responsible for the Tapping World Summits. They've produced all 10. We just had the 10th one of the annual Tapping World Summits. And they've both also written books, and one of, I think, Nick's most recent book, he wrote a book called 20 Manifesting Your Greatest Self. So it was about using tapping to try to create the life you really want. I highly recommend that book. He also wrote a book on tapping for pain relief, which out of all of his books was my absolute favorite. And on page 99 of that book, he says something that I think is really important, and I wanted to read this quote to you. He says that the only emotions that do any actual harm to the body are the ones we repress. The only emotions that the body sees as threatening are the ones we don't express fully. And I think that's so important. So that's why at the beginning of the setup statement, we acknowledge what is really happening. And then the second part of this setup statement is when we choose that, you know what, even though this bad thing is happening in my life, I accept myself anyway. I accept where I am now. There are so many different ways you can say this. A lot of people say, even though this thing is happening, I love and accept myself. Or even though this thing is happening, I accept myself and how I feel. Or I accept myself and how I feel about it. Or I accept myself and my feelings. However you want to phrase it is really up to you, but the setup statement generally is a negative statement. What's bothering you? What's the problem? What is your tapping target? Followed by a positive statement and affirmation that, you know what, even if this does continue, I still love myself. It's still going to be okay. And so you're essentially calming your nervous system after bringing up this traumatic thing that you're trying to clear. So that's how we start, and that's generally on the karate chop point. And we usually say it 3 times, and you can say it in different ways. Sometimes you change up the negative part or the positive part. You could say the exact same statement 3 times in a row. It's fine. But when you're doing that and when you're tapping in the karate chop point, you're essentially waking up your nervous system and focusing your mind on the issue, but still accepting yourself even with that issue. The unconditional love that's and acceptance that's a part of this process is really, really powerful in the end. Nick often mentions in all of his books and in a number of his videos and workshops a conversation that he had with Louise Hay, who some of you may know from all of her work on positive affirmations and healing using affirmations. He, in one of his interviews with Louise Hay, asked her, why do we focus on the negative first? Doesn't that, solidify it and ingrain it in our systems? Aren't we trying to think positively and let go of these things? And she said something that he loved and repeats very often, and that's that she said that if you want to clean a house, you have to see the dirt. And that's essentially what we're doing inside of our bodies. We're trying to clean house. We're trying to find the things, the blocks, the limiting beliefs that are keeping us stuck so that we can move them and clean them out. And so we really do have to acknowledge the negative first. If we jump right to the positive without acknowledging the negative first, it's not nearly as effective, because you really need to clear the negative before you can start focusing on, the alternative. Okay, once this is cleared, now what can I focus my energy on instead, now that I've finally cleared that out of my system? So both are equally important. You really need to acknowledge the truth, what is, before you can start focusing on what might be, on the possibilities, what will be in the future.